Welcome students to the best moment of your life pre-cal homework help class. Woohoo, here we go. All right, we are looking at page 19 through 34 all. Yes, sirree. 16 problems of pure fun and enjoyment. So you were either watching the ones that you missed and you checked in the back of the book, the odds, or you're watching the whole thing because you're really struggling, or you're checking the evens, whatever camp you fall in. Let's get started. Number 19, let's factor this. Step 1 is pull out what's common. Well, there's a 1 and a 6 and an 8. There's no number I can pull out. I have p's here and a p here, but I have no p's here, so I can't pull a p out. So step 1 is done. There's nothing common I can factor out. Step 2, ask yourself, what do you have here? Well, I've got a trinomial that has a lead coefficient of 1. So that's really not step 2, but we have a lead coefficient of 1 trinomial. So step 2 says to list out all the factors of this last term. Okay? And we'll do it each one 2 times. So we have 1 times 8, 1 times 8, 2 times 4, 2 times 4. Now, what type of 8 do I have? Positive. So I want a positive times a positive. That would give me a positive 8. Negative times a negative. That would work. Give me a positive. Positive times a positive. Negative times a negative. So there. I did step 2. I listed out all the factors of this last term. And step 3 says choose one of these groups based on your middle term. Now your middle term is a positive 6. So let's see. No, no, no. Yes. If I add those two numbers together right there, I will get a positive 6. So I'm ready to put my 2 parentheses. And now, what do I put here and here? Well, look at your first term. I have a p squared, so a p and a p. And then what do I put here and here? Well, I just have a number here. It's an 8. And the group that I chose was a positive 2 and a positive 4. So there we go. P plus 2, P plus 4. And we factored number 19. Number 20. All right. Always pull out what's common. That's step 1. Well, there's a 1, a 7, and a 10. No numbers I can pull out there. And do all of my terms have a W? No. So I can't pull out or factor out any W. So I'm done with step 1. Now, what am I left over with? I'm left over with a trinomial, 1, 2, 3 terms with the lead coefficient of 1. So step 2 is list out all the factors of your last term. In this case, it's a positive 10. So let's list out the factors of positive 10. We'll list each one twice. 1 times 10, 1 times 10, 2 times 5, and 2 times 5. Now, what kind of 10 do I want, by the way? That's correct. Good. Positive 10. So I want a positive times a positive, negative times a negative, positive times a positive, and a negative times a negative. Now, step 3 says choose one of these groups based on your middle term. Well, my middle term is a negative 7. Negative 7 right there. Negative 7W, but I'm looking at the number. So that's the group I want right there. If I add those two numbers together, negative 2, negative 5, if I add those, I'll get a negative 7. So put your 2 parentheses. Now, what goes in your first spot here? Well, you have a W squared, so I'm assuming it would be wise to put a W and a W. Now, what goes in your last 2 spots here? Well, I've got a positive 10. There's no variable, it's the positive 10, so I think I want to use a negative 2. And a negative 5. And by the way, those 2 parentheses can be switched around. That's totally fine. All right, let's go on to number 21. 21. Step 1, pull out what's common. Well, I've got a 1, a 8, and a 12, so there's no number I can pull out. I have no x in this term, so I cannot pull any x's out. So I've done step 1. Now, let's see what I've got. I've got a trinomial, 1, 2, 3 terms, with a lead coefficient of 1. So step 2 says to list out all the factors of your last term. In this case, it would be a 12. So here we go. 1 times 12. We'll do each one twice. 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, 3 times 4. And I do want a positive 12, so it would be a positive times a positive, negative times a negative, and we'll keep using that same pattern over and over. There we go. Now, step 3 says pick one of these groups based on what your middle term is. My middle term has a negative 8 for its coefficient. So negative 8, negative 8, negative 8, negative 8. Here it is right here. If I add a negative 2 and a negative 6 together, I will get a negative 8. So Go ahead and put your parentheses. Now, what am I going to put in my first two blanks? Well, I look at my first term, it's an x squared. So I'm going to put an x and an x. Now, what am I going to put in my last two blanks here? Well, I look at my last term, it's a 12. There's no variables with it, no letters. So for negative 12, or for positive 12, excuse me, I'm going to put a negative 2 and a negative 6. And there we go. We have factored number 20. By the way, let's do something we haven't done yet real quick. Let's check this one. If I took x times x, I would get x squared. If I took x times negative 6, that'd be negative 6x. If I took negative 2 times x, I would get negative 2x. If I took negative 2 times negative 6, I would get a positive 12. Here's two like terms right here, so we'll put those together. And negative 6 and negative 2 is the negative 8x plus 12. Is that not identical to what I started with right up here? Most definitely it is, certainly. All right, okay, let's continue on to number 22. Okay, first of all, we pull out, step 1 says pull out what's common. I have a 1, a 6, and a 5. There's no whole number I can pull out. Step 2, let's look at the x's. There's no x here with this term. Right here it's just a 5, so I cannot pull any x's out. So what am I left over with? I've got a trinomial, 3 terms, with a lead coefficient of 1. So here we go. Step 2 says list out all the factors of your last term, each one twice. So a positive 5, that'd be 1 times 5, 1 times 5. I can't think of anything else, that's it. And it's a positive 5, so I want a positive times a positive, negative times a negative. Now step 3 says pick one of these groups based on your middle term. Your middle term is a positive 6. So that's the group that I want. If you add those two numbers together, you will get a positive 6. So let's go ahead and put our two parentheses. What goes in my first place of each parentheses? Well, I look at my first term, x squared. So I'm going to put an x and an x. Now I look at my 5, my last term, which is a 5. I know I'm going to put a positive 1 and a positive 5. And I got that from these two numbers right here. And there we did it. Moving on to 23. Cooking right along. Okay, there's a 1, an 8, and a 15, so there's nothing I can pull out number-wise. Every term does not have a t, so I cannot pull anything out. So step 1 is done. Now, before I do my next step, I better look at what I have. I have a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So here we go. List out all the factors of positive 15. So 1 times 15, 1 times 15, 3 times 5, 3 times 5. And it is a positive 15, so I want a positive times a positive, negative times a negative, etc., etc. Now, step 3 says pick one of these terms or one of these sets based on your middle term. Now, your middle term is a positive 8, positive 8t. So which one of these would add up to a positive 8? This one. If I take 3 and 5 and add them together, I will get a positive 8. So that's the group that I want to use. So go ahead and put your two sets of parentheses. And now for your first blank, right here and here, what would I put? Well, I've got a t squared, so I'm going to put a t and a t. Now, what about my last blank here? Well, look at your last term. It's a positive 15. There's no t's with it, no variables, so I'm going to use positive 3 and positive 5 and nothing else. And of course, I get positive 3 and positive 5 because that's the group that I circled off to the side. There, we did it. We factor number 23. Number 24. It's getting a little redundant, but it's good practice for you. Number 24. Okay, pull out what's common. Well, I've got a 1, a 12, and a 27. There's no coefficient I can pull out. Y's. Well, there's not a y here in this term, so I can't pull any y's out. So I have a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So step 2 says list out all of the factors of my last term, in this case positive 27. So 1 times 27, 1 times 27, 3 times 9, 3 times 9. That's it. Now it's a positive 27, so I want this pattern right here. Positive times a positive, negative times a negative. All right. Now, step 3 says pick one of these groups based on your middle term. Now, your middle term is positive 12y. One of these has to add up to a positive 12, or we can't factor it, which does happen sometimes. Okay, there it is. If you add a positive 3 and a positive 9, you will get a positive 12. So I am ready now to put two sets of parentheses. And because I have a y squared here, I'm going to put a y and a y. And because I have a 27 here with no variables, I'm going to put a positive 3 and a positive 9. And I knew what two numbers to use because that was the group I circled over here. All right, number 25. Finally something a little different, finally. Okay. Step 1, pull out what's common. Well, I've got a 1, a 6, and a 27. There's really no coefficient you can pull out. However, look at this. Oh, you know what? I can't pull anything out. I thought I had x's, but I don't. I've got an x here in this term, an x in this term, but no x in this term. I have a y in this term, a y in this term, but no y in this term. So I can't pull anything out. So I move on. Do I have a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1? Yes, I do. I do. So my steps say list out the factors of your last term. It's 27. So 1 times 27, 1 times 27. 3 times 9, 3 times 9. Now hold it. What type of 27 do you want? Negative. So a positive times a negative and a negative times a positive. We'll use that same pattern all the way through here. There we go. Now your step 3 is you need to pick one of these groups based on the middle term. So my middle term is negative 6xy, so I'm looking at negative 6. So one of these should add up to negative 6. There it is. If I take positive 3 and negative 9 and add them together, I will get a negative 6. So here we go. This is going to be a little tricky. Pay attention, watch. Okay, I have x squared right here, so I'm going to put an x and an x, right? But look at this. I have a negative 27, so I know I'm going to use positive 3 and negative 9, but look, I also have y squared. So I've got to put a y and a y, and then what goes in front of this y? Well, a positive 3. And what goes in front of this y? A negative 9. So x plus 3y, x minus 9y. There you go. Look that over, think it through. It's a good problem. All right, number 26. I have a 1, a 2, and a 15, so I cannot pull any coefficients out. I do not have a t in every term, so I cannot pull out a t. I have a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1, so the first step is to write all my factors of my last term. In this case, it's 15. So 1 times 15, 1 times 15. 3 times 5, 3 times 5. I want a negative 15, so a positive times a negative and a negative times a positive. Same pattern all the way through. All right, now step 3 says pick one of these groups based on your middle term. Now my middle term is negative 2t, so I've got a negative 2. One of these has to add up to negative 2, and it's this one right here. All right, so I come over here, put my 2 parentheses. Because I have a t squared right here for my first term, I'm going to put a t and a t. And then because I have a negative 15 for my last term, I'm going to put a positive 3 and a negative 5. And I got those from this group over here that I circled. Okay? All right, moving on. Let's take a look at number 27. Let me scroll down here. Number 27. All right, step 1 is pull out what's common. There's not an n in every term, but I do have coefficients of 2, 20, and 48, so I can pull out a 2. All right, so here we go. 2 times blank would give me 2n squared. Well, 2 times n squared would give me 2n squared. 2 times blank would give me negative 20n. Well, I think it would be a negative 10n. If I take 2 times negative 10n, I'll get negative 20n. And then 2 times negative 24, right? 2 times negative 24 would give me a negative 48. All right, so I pulled out a 2. Now, let's see what I'm left over with on the inside here. I've got a trinomial, 1, 2, 3 terms, with a lead coefficient of 1. A trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So I know that I now do step 2, which is take this negative 24 and list all of the factors off to the side. There's going to be quite a few, actually, for 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. And as you get better and better at this, if you don't need to list all these out, that's totally fine. That's your decision, okay? I just do this now as a teacher to make sure everyone's seeing this, okay? All right, I've got a negative 24, so I know I want a positive times a negative and a negative times a positive, because a positive times a negative gives me a negative, and a negative times a positive gives me a negative. All right, so we're going to continue this pattern all the way through. Now, step 3 says pick one of these groups based on your middle term. Your middle term is negative 10n. So I'm looking for something that adds up to negative 10. Now, right away I saw these here, but those aren't it. Those, if you add this, you get a negative 2. If you add this, you get a positive 2. So those aren't it. Let's see. Here it is right here. Look. If I take a positive 2 and a negative 12 and I add those together, I'll get a negative 10. So you bring down your 2. You put your 2 parentheses. And now, because I have an n squared here, I put an n and an n, and because I have just a negative 24 right here, I put a positive 2 and a negative 24, or excuse me, it's not right, negative 12. All right, there we go. You factored it. Moving on, having tons of fun. Number 28. All right, I've got step 1 says factor out what's common. I've got a 2, and a 24. So I'm going to pull out a 2. I've got an A and an A, but no A here. I've got a B and a B. I'm going to say a B and a B, but no B here. So all that I can pull out is a 2. So 2 times, I'm going to put an A squared here. 2 times A squared is 2A squared. Here I would put negative AB. I really would, because 2 times negative AB is negative 2AB. Then over here I put a negative 12B squared, because 2 times negative 12B squared is negative 24B squared. Now, I pulled out what's common. Step 2 says to list out all of the factors of my last term. I've got a negative 12B squared. I'm just worried about the coefficient, which is negative 12. So I'm going to list out all the factors of negative 12. And do that very quickly here. And again, if you're to the place where you don't need to list these out, that's fine. I'm proud of you. That's good. Okay, so negative 12. So a positive times a negative would give you a negative 12, and a negative times a positive would give you a negative 12. And we'll continue this pattern all the way through. Very good. Now, step 3 says choose one of your groups based on your middle term. Now, I'm not seeing a middle number here, a coefficient, but you know if it's a negative AB, it's really a negative 1AB. We should know that, okay, negative 1AB. So I'm looking for some group over here that adds up to a negative 1. Here it is. If I take a positive 3 and a negative 4 and add them together, I will get a negative 1. So those are the two numbers I want. So I'm going to bring down my 2 right here. Bring down your 2, and then put your 2 sets of parentheses. Now, because I have an A squared right here, I'm going to put an A and an A. And then because I have a 12, look, B squared, 12B squared, I know I've got to put a B and a B. And then for the 12, I'm going to put a positive 3, because of this group right here that I circled, and a negative 4. There we go. We are factoring very well. All right, number 29. Now, number 29, there's a 1, a 4, and a 21. Step 1 says pull out what's common. There's no coefficients I can pull out. There's not a y in every term, so there's nothing I can pull out. So let's see, I have what? A trinomial. Here's my 3 terms with a lead coefficient of 1. So step 2 says for me to list out all the factors of this last term. So 1 times 21, 1 times 21. This is all I can think of right here. 3 times 7, 3 times 7. It is a negative 21, so a positive times a negative is a negative, and a negative times a positive is a negative. We'll continue that pattern all the way through. Now, the next step says to pick one of these groups based on your middle term. Now, your middle term is a negative 4, so one of these adds up to a negative 4. It's going to be that one right there. Okay, so I'm going to put 2 sets of parentheses. There we go. And now notice your first term is y to the 4th. So I'm going to put y squared. Do you see that? And y squared. Very important you see that. Now your last term is just negative 21. There's no letters or variables with it. So I'm going to use these numbers here, positive 3 and negative 7. And there I have factored number 29. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at number 30. It looks like the same type of problem like the previous problem. Well, step 1, we always want to factor out what's common first. So there's not an m in every term. I have a 1 and a 1 and a 90, so there's no whole numbers or no integers I can factor out. There's no variables I can factor out, so we're moving on. I have a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1, so I know the first thing I want to do is list out all my factors of 90. This could really get ugly. I'm not sure how many we're going to have. This could really, I'm not sure. Let's see, 2 times 45. I know 3 times 30. 4 would not work. 5 would. 5 would go in 16 times? No, 18 times. 5 times 18, 5 times 18. 6 goes into it 15 times. This is going to be a truckload of fun here. And then 9 times 10 and 9 times 10. Now, if you did not want to write all those out, that's fine. You can just kind of watch. I don't care. But it's a negative 90. So you know I want a positive and a negative and a negative and a positive. I really don't want to write these all the way through, students. I really want to be wise with our time, but I'd go ahead and write all that down. After you wrote or have written, after you have written all of those signs in, look at your middle term. It's a negative. There's no number there, so it's understood to be a -1. There's a -1 there. So one of these adds up to a -1. Well, we're going to come down here to where we would have a positive and a negative, and a negative and a positive, okay? Well, a +9 and a -10. If you were to continue writing all these signs down through here, you'd see you would end up with a +9, -10. And if you add those two together, you will get a -1. So that's the group that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2 parentheses. Now, look at your first term. It's m to the 4th. So I'm going to put m squared, and then for -90, there's no variables or letters with it. I'm just going to put a +9 and a -10. There we go. Factor that and moving on. Let's take a look at number 31. All right, now on number 31, we always stop and we always pull out what's common first. I've got a 1, a 9, and a 14. So there's no whole numbers or no integers I can pull out. But look at your variables. I have 4y's, 3y's, and 2y's. So I can take 2y's out. So I'm going to pull 2y's out. And let's see what we're left with. Y squared times y squared would give you y to the 4th. Y squared times 9y. Think about that. Y squared times 9y would be 9y cubed. And then y squared times 14. If you took y squared times 14, you would get 14y squared. All right. Now, look what you're left over with on the inside. A trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. A trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So we're going to list out all the factors of your last term, which is 14. So 1 times 14, 1 times 14, 2 times 7, 2 times 7. And it's a +14, so I want a positive times a positive, negative times a negative. We'll continue with that pattern all the way through here. There we go. Now, one of these groups adds up to a +9. So we're going to pick that group. There it is. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring down our y squared, put our 2 parentheses, and now notice your first term right here is a y squared. So I'm going to put a y and a y. My last term right here is a +14. So I'm going to put a +2 and a +7. And there, we have done it. Pretty simple. That's number 31. All right, number 32. Well, I can pull quite a bit of stuff out of this. I've got a 3, a 21, and an 18. So I know for sure I can pull a 3 out. I've got 3 z's, 2 z's, and I've got 1 z right here. So I know I can pull 1 z out. Let's go ahead and do that. I always put lines through my z's so that they don't look like 2's. Okay, 3z times z squared, right? 3z times z squared will give you 3z cubed. 3z, now watch this. See if this makes sense. -7z. 3 times -7 is -21. Z times z is z squared. And then over here I would put a +6 because 3z times 6 is 18z. So there I've pulled out a 3z. Now I'm left over with a trinomial with a lead coefficient of 1. So I'm going to list out all the factors of 6. So my last term, which is 6. So 1 times 6, 1 times 6, 2 times 3, 2 times 3. It is a +6, so my sequence needs to run positive times a positive, negative times a negative, etc., etc. There. So I've listed out all my factors of 6. Now, one of these groups, I'm going to pick one of these groups based on my middle term, which is a -7z. And the group I'm going to pick is this, because if you add a -1 and a -6, you get a -7. So I'm going to bring down my 3z, then put my 2 little parentheses, and here we go. My first term is a z squared right here, so I'm going to put a z and a z. And then my last term is just a 6, so I'm going to put a -1 and a -6. All right, and that's it. We're finished. We have factored it. That's really not too bad. 2 problems left. Let's take a look at number 33. All right, I can pull a 2 out, 2, 2, and 24, so pull a 2 out. There's not a y in every term. There's a y in this term and this term, but not over in this term. But there is an x in every term. 3 x's, 2 x's, and right here I have 1 x. So I can pull 1 x out. So let's see what we're left with. Here we go. 2x times 2x squared, right? No, that's wrong. Ha. not at all. It's wrong. Just x squared. There we go. 2x times x squared is 2x cubed. And then here, 2 times negative 1x y. See if that works. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. X times x is x squared. There's no y's. I have a y here, so a y. Works perfectly. Okay, 2 times something has to give me negative 24xy squared. Well, I know I'm going to put a 12 because 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. X, I've got an x here, and I've got an x here, so I don't put any x's. And then I've got a y squared. There's no y's here. So 2x times negative 12y squared would be negative 24xy squared. So good, we're doing great. Now I'm left over with a trinomial here that has a lead coefficient of 1. So I'm going to list out all the factors of my last term, which is a negative 12. So 1 times 12, 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 2 times 6, 3 times 4, 3 times 4. It is a negative 12, so I want to use positive times a negative and negative times a positive. Over and over. And now one of these groups right here, one of these groups will add up to negative 1. And here it is. If you take a positive 3 and a negative 4 and add them together, you will get a negative 1. So we bring down our 2x, put your 2 parentheses. Now be careful, put your 2 parentheses. Now look at your first term here, x squared. So I know I'm going to put an x and an x. Now your last term is 12y squared. So I know that I need a y and a y. And then for my negative 12, I've circled these two numbers over here. I need a positive 3 and a negative 4. So x plus 3y, x minus 4y with a 2x on the outside. And we are down to one problem. So let's knock this out. Step 1, factor out what's common. I've got a 1, a 9, and a 20, so I cannot factor out any whole numbers. Every term has an a. 3, 2, and 1, so I can pull 1a out. Every term has a b, so I can pull, let's see, 1b, 2, 3, I can pull 1b out. And now let's see what we're left with. This will be interesting. ab times something to give me a cubed b. Well, that's got to be a squared. A times a squared is a cubed, and b times nothing here is b. Now, next, I would put a negative 9. Think about it, and then an a and a b. Because there's really a 1 here, even though you can't see it. So 1 times negative 9 is negative 9. A times a is a squared. B times b is b squared. Now we come down to the last term. I'm going to put positive 20b squared. Let's see if that's right. There's really a 1 here, so 1 times 20 is 20. And then a times, well, there's no a here. That would just be a. And then b times b squared is b cubed. So now we're totally ready to go ahead and try to factor what's left over on the inside. Now I'm left over with a trinomial that has a lead coefficient of 1. So what I've taught you to do is to look at the last term and list out all the factors of that integer. So 1 times 20, or that coefficient, excuse me. 1 times 20, 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 2 times 10, 4 times 5, 4 times 5. We do have a positive 20, so that'd be a positive times a positive, negative times a negative. We'll continue that sign sequence all the way through. Now, just one of these groups, you have to pick one of these groups here based on your middle term, and your middle term is a negative 9. Well, students, the only group that adds up to negative 9 is negative 4 and negative 5. If you add those two numbers together, you will get a negative 9. So those are the two numbers we want to use. So bring down your AB, don't forget to do that, and then put your 2 parentheses. And now let's see what we're going to have. My first term's a squared right here. So I'm going to put a and a. My last term is b squared, so I'm going to put a b and a b, and then there's a 20 right here, 20b squared. So for the 20, I'm going to use a negative 4 and a negative 5. All right, so there we go. And that is the correct factorization for this polynomial up here. I hope this homework video has been a help to you guys. I hope you're working hard. Call or email if you have any questions.